Accustomed to control, a wealthy man finds something he cannot explain. Two twin girls awaken in him a restlessness that escapes all logic. Upon approaching them, he discovers a reality that is simple yet profoundly striking. And this discovery leads him to a choice that will change his destiny. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love has interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us. Continuing, Roberto Almeida never believed in signs of destiny. For him, everything in life happened through planning, strategy, and impeccable execution. At 50 years old, he had built an empire in the technology sector that placed him among the most respected businessmen in São Paulo. His routine was organized with millimeter precision: meetings, conferences, international trips, and deals involving millions. There was no room for the unforeseen. There was no room for uncontrolled emotions. And primarily, there was no room for regrets. But some absences cannot be filled with money, and Roberto knew this better than anyone. The inability to have children had been diagnosed when he was still in his 30s, while he was married to Flavia, a talented architect who dreamed of a large family. The news arrived like a silent blow, the kind that makes no noise but collapses entire structures from within. Flavia tried to pretend everything was fine, that their love would be enough. Roberto, in turn, dove into work with an almost sickly intensity, transforming pain into productivity. The marriage did not survive. She left in search of a new beginning. He remained exactly where he was, building walls ever higher around himself. 20 years later, Roberto was a successful, respected, and completely lonely man. On that Thursday in September, he was on his way to Belo Horizonte to close an expansion contract for one of his companies. The driver, an experienced gentleman named Seu Antonio, knew the roads of Minas Gerais well and guaranteed they would arrive on time. But life has a peculiar way of disorganizing certainties. Just over 100 kilometers from the state capital, the car began to show a strange mechanical problem, a metallic noise that could not be ignored. Seu Antonio pulled over to the side of the road, concerned. The analysis was quick and clear. It was not safe to continue without checking the engine. Roberto sighed, controlling his irritation. He called the team in Belo Horizonte to warn them of the delay, mentally reorganized his commitments, and looked around. They were near a small town called Valle da Esperança, a name that seemed ironic at that moment. Seu Antonio suggested they look for a mechanic right there while they waited for the tow truck coming from the capital. Roberto agreed, more out of pragmatism than patience. They walked down a cobblestone street until they found a small establishment. The mechanic, a friendly middle-aged man, assessed the problem and guaranteed he would resolve it in a few hours. Roberto nodded, checked his watch, and decided to walk for a bit. Standing still made him even more impatient. The afternoon was warm, with that September sun that heats without burning. The houses were simple, colorful, with porches where residents chatted peacefully. There was a small square in the center, with wooden benches and children playing. Roberto observed all of this with the detachment of someone who lives at another rhythm, in another dimension. He did not belong to that place. He did not, in fact, belong anywhere. It was when he turned a silent corner that something changed. At the end of a dirt road, there was a very simple house painted in faded blue with a small cement porch, and there, sitting on the entrance steps, were two girls, twins, identical. They were about 8 years old, with brown hair tied in ponytails, clothes that were clean but visibly patched. What caught Roberto's attention was not their appearance, but the way they were, united, with a closeness that went beyond the physical. It was as if they shared the same thought, the same air, the same existence. They weren't playing, they weren't running. They just observed the world with a serenity that was disturbing for such young children. Roberto stopped without realizing it. He stood there a few meters away, as if pulled by an invisible force. One of the girls held a small, worn-out teddy bear in her hands, with one ear missing and its color faded by time. She pressed it against her chest with almost religious care, as if that object were the only anchor she possessed. The other girl kept her gaze fixed on the street, attentive, as if guarding something only she could see. When they noticed Roberto's presence, the two turned their faces at the same time. They showed no surprise. They didn't scream. They weren't startled. They just observed. It was as if they were used to being observed, to being judged, to being forgotten. Roberto felt something strange in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't pity. It was restlessness. It was as if those two girls could see through him, through all the armor he had built over the years. He took a step forward without thinking much. The girls didn't move. They remained seated, waiting. Waiting for what, he didn't know. His voice came out softer than he expected. "Good afternoon." No response. Only the brown eyes fixed on him, evaluating, measuring, trying to understand. Roberto looked around. The house was small but organized. There was an old curtain in the window, pots with hardy plants on the porch, clothes hanging on the clothesline in the back. Everything indicated effort, care, dignity. But it also revealed absence. Absence of resources. Absence of stability. Absence of someone who stayed. "Do you live here?" he asked, knowing the question was obvious, but not knowing what else to say. One of the girls, the one holding the teddy bear, nodded slowly. The other remained silent, but her gaze became slightly more defensive. Roberto approached a little closer, slowly, like someone approaching a frightened animal. "Are your parents home?" The answer came dryly, almost automatically. "We don't have a father, and mother isn't here." The simplicity of the sentence carried a weight that Roberto was not prepared to feel. "We don't have a father, and mother isn't here." As if it were normal, as if it were the only truth they knew. He swallowed hard. "And who takes care of you?" The girl with the teddy bear finally spoke in a low but firm voice. "We take care of each other." Roberto felt the ground move beneath his feet. It wasn't a physical sensation, but an emotional one. Something inside him, something that had been dormant for decades, began to awaken. He looked at the two girls, at the way they stayed close, at the impossible maturity stamped on such young faces, and realized something terrifying. He recognized that. He recognized loneliness disguised as strength. He recognized abandonment transformed into resilience. "Can I sit here with you?" he asked, pointing to the step beside them. The girls looked at each other. It was a silent exchange, quick but loaded with communication. After a few seconds, the one holding the teddy bear shrugged. The other kept her expression neutral, but did not protest. Roberto sat down, maintaining a respectful distance. He stayed there in silence for a while, just observing the empty street, the sun beginning to descend on the horizon, the gentle wind swaying the leaves of the trees. He didn't know why he was doing that. He didn't know what he expected to find. He only knew he couldn't leave. "What are your names?" he asked after a long silence. "Helena," replied the girl with the teddy bear. "Julia," said the other with a slightly more suspicious tone. Roberto nodded. "Beautiful names. I am Roberto." New silence, but this time he noticed that the tension had decreased a little. Julia relaxed her shoulders. Helena squeezed the teddy bear with less force. "Do you go to school?" Helena nodded. "We go to the school in the center. We like it." "And what else do you like?" It was Julia who answered, for the first time with a slight sparkle in her eyes. "Drawing. Helena draws very well." Helena lowered her gaze, a bit shy. "Julia draws too, and she can read faster than I can." Roberto smiled. It was the first time in a long time that he smiled truly, without calculating the impact, without measuring the consequences. "You must be very talented." The girls didn't answer, but he noticed a subtle change. Something in the way they breathed, how they allowed themselves to be there, how they began to accept his presence. Roberto looked at the house again. "Is it just the two of you living here?" Helena hesitated. Julia took the lead with a firmness that was painful to hear. "Mother works far away. She sends money sometimes. A neighbor watches over us." "Sometimes," Roberto repeated, more to himself than to them. "And when she doesn't watch over you?" "We manage," said Julia, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Roberto felt something break inside him. It wasn't anger, it wasn't judgment, it was understanding. Those two girls, so small, had already learned that they couldn't depend on anyone but each other. They already knew the world was not kind. They had already built their own defenses. "And that teddy bear?" he asked, looking at the toy in Helena's hands. She squeezed the little creature tighter. "It belonged to our grandmother. She's gone now. It's all we have of her." The way Helena said that with such mature acceptance made Roberto realize that these girls had already faced losses he couldn't even imagine, and yet there they were, together, standing. He stayed there with them until the sun began to set. They spoke little, but it was enough. He discovered they had lived in that house for 3 years since their grandmother passed away, that their mother, Veronica, worked in another city and rarely returned, that they survived with sporadic help from neighbors and with the pension their mother sent when she could, that they learned to cook, to wash clothes, to take care of themselves, that they were 8 years old but carried the weight of an entire lifetime. When Seu Antonio called to warn him that the car was ready, Roberto stood up slowly. The girls watched him in silence. "I need to go," he said, but something in his voice sounded different, less firm, less controlled. Helena and Julia waved. "Goodbye, Mr. Roberto." He walked a few steps but stopped. He turned around. "Can I come back tomorrow?" The girls looked at each other again, then Helena gave a small smile. "You can." Roberto nodded and moved forward, but he knew something had changed. For the first time in 20 years, he wasn't thinking about business, about contracts, about expansions. He was thinking about 2 girls who weren't his, but who somehow, in that instant, touched a place inside him that he thought no longer existed. And as the car headed toward Belo Horizonte, Roberto Almeida realized that his life, so meticulously planned, had just encountered the only unforeseen event he would not be able to ignore. Roberto didn't sleep that night. Even after the meeting in Belo Horizonte, even after closing the contract that would move millions, his mind returned insistently to that dirt road, to that faded blue house, to those 2 girls who observed the world with eyes too old for the age they had. He tried to convince himself it was just a moment of emotional weakness, a sentimental flash that would pass with time. But the truth, the one he knew well when it came to business, was undeniable. Something had ruptured inside him. The next morning, Friday, he cancelled the meeting scheduled in São Paulo and asked Seu Antonio to take him back to Valle da Esperança. The driver didn't ask questions, but Roberto noticed the curious look in the rearview mirror. He offered no explanations. He still didn't know how to explain something he himself didn't fully understand. They arrived in the small town around 10 in the morning. The sun was strong, and the streets were busier than the day before. Roberto asked Seu Antonio to wait in the central square and walked alone to the street where Helena and Julia lived. His heart, accustomed to high-risk negotiations, beat in a strange way. It wasn't fear. It was expectation mixed with something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. As he turned the corner, he saw the 2 girls in the same place, sitting on the porch steps. This time, however, they weren't just observing. Helena was drawing in an old notebook, her tongue between her teeth in total concentration. Julia was reading in a low voice to her, holding a thin book with torn covers. The scene had a delicacy that contrasted brutally with the harshness of the situation they lived in. When Roberto approached, Julia looked up first. There was a brief flash of surprise, followed by something that could be interpreted as contained satisfaction. Helena dropped her pencil and smiled timidly. "You came back," said Julia, as if she were testing if it was real. Roberto nodded. "I promised, didn't I?" Helena quickly closed the notebook, as if hiding something precious. Julia remained standing, her posture still defensive, but less rigid than the day before. "Can I see what you were drawing?" Roberto asked, pointing to the notebook. Helena hesitated. She looked at Julia, seeking silent approval. Her sister shrugged in a gesture that said, "Do what you want, but be careful." Helena opened the notebook slowly and showed it. Roberto stepped closer and felt the air leave his lungs. The drawing was of a house. Not the faded blue house where they were, but a large house with huge windows, a flowered garden, and 2 girls holding hands on the porch. The technique was rudimentary, done with worn-out colored pencils, but there was something in the way Helena had captured the light, the proportion, the emotion, that revealed a genuine talent. "This is beautiful, Helena," Roberto said, and his voice came out choked. "Did you draw this from your head?" She nodded. "It's the house I dream we will have one day with Julia." Roberto swallowed hard. "And where is this house?" Helena shrugged. "I don't know, maybe it doesn't exist, but I like to draw it." Julia sat down again beside her sister. "She always draws these things, houses, gardens, families, things we don't have. The brutal honesty of the words hit Roberto like a punch. He sat on the steps, maintaining the respectful distance he had already established. "And you, Julia, what do you like?" Julia picked up the book she was reading. "Stories. I like to read about different places, different people, places where things work out." Roberto looked at the two girls, at the way they completed each other, at the way one protected the other even without realizing it. Helena was the dreamer, the one who kept hope alive through art. Julia was the guardian, the one who observed the world with suspicion to ensure nothing hurt her sister. Together, they formed a perfect emotional survival system, but fragile, dangerously fragile. "Did you have breakfast?" Roberto asked, noticing it was past 10 and there was no sign of food nearby. Helena shook her head. "The neighbor was going to bring bread, but I think she forgot." Roberto felt anger rise, but he controlled it. It wasn't the time for judgments. "Let's do this. I'm going to get something for us to eat together. Will you wait for me here?" The girls looked at each other again, that silent communication that Roberto was beginning to recognize. Then Julia nodded. "We'll wait." Roberto went to the bakery in the town center and bought bread, cakes, juice, fruit. More than necessary, he knew, but he couldn't control the impulse to offer abundance where there was scarcity. When he returned, the girls were still there, waiting exactly as they had promised. They ate together on the porch. Roberto observed how Helena and Julia shared everything automatically, even when there was enough for both. Each bite was calculated, each sip was measured. It wasn't greed, it was the opposite. It was the deep fear that the bounty would never last. After eating, Roberto asked permission to enter the house. Julia hesitated, but Helena nodded yes. The interior was even more revealing than he had imagined. 2 thin mattresses on the floor of a tiny room, patched blankets, some clothes folded carefully in wooden crates. In the small living room, there was an old table with mismatched chairs, and on the walls, dozens of Helena's drawings taped up. Houses, gardens, smiling families. Silent dreams of a child who didn't ask for much, just the basics that everyone deserved. Roberto felt something solidify inside him. It was no longer a passing restlessness. It was a certainty. He turned to the girls who were watching him from the door with cautious expressions. "Can I ask you a serious question?" Julia crossed her arms. "You can. Are you happy here?" The silence that followed was heavy. Helena looked at the floor. Julia kept her gaze firm, but Roberto saw the internal struggle happening behind those eyes. "We aren't unhappy," Julia finally said. "We have each other. That's more than a lot of people have." "But what if it could be different?" Roberto insisted, choosing his words carefully. "What if you could have more, not just food and clothes, but stability, education, opportunities?" Helena looked up, and for the first time Roberto saw something beyond resignation. He saw will, he saw desire, but he also saw fear. "What do you mean?" Julia asked, her voice firm but her eyes revealing vulnerability. Roberto took a deep breath. "I mean that I would like to help you, for real, not just today but always." Julia frowned. "Why? You don't even know us." The question was fair. Roberto knew that. He himself didn't have a completely rational answer. "Because when I look at you two, I see something I never had. I see strength, unity, potential. And I see 2 girls who deserve much more than the world is offering you right now." "But we aren't your problem," Julia said, her voice breaking a little. "We are nothing to you." Roberto knelt down, getting at their level. "I know I am nothing to you yet, but I would like to be. If you let me." Helena took a step forward. "Do you want to be like a father?" The word hit Roberto with full force. Father. Something he would never be biologically, something he had given up on being so long ago. But there, at that moment, looking at those 2 girls who needed exactly that, the word didn't sound impossible. It sounded inevitable. "Yes," he said, with a firmness that surprised himself. "If you want. I would like to be your father." Julia stepped back, her eyes wide. "And our mother, what if she comes back?" Roberto chose his words with extreme care. "I don't want to take anything away from you. If your mother comes back and wants to take care of you, I will respect that. But until then, or even after, I want to ensure you have everything you need. Security, education, affection. A real home." Helena looked at the drawing she still held in her hands. Like the house in my drawing? Roberto felt his eyes burn. Exactly like the one in your drawing, or even better. The girls looked at each other for a long time. Roberto waited, his heart racing, without forcing, without pressing. He knew that decision had to come from them. It was Helena who spoke first, her voice low but clear. "Can we think about it?" Roberto nodded. "Of course, think for as long as you need. I'll be in town for a few days. Can I come back tomorrow?" Julia took a deep breath. "You can." Roberto spent the rest of the afternoon with them. He helped Helena draw, listened to Julia read her favorite stories, talked about simple and profound things. And with every minute that passed, the certainty grew. He wasn't doing this out of pity. He wasn't doing this to fill a void. He was doing it because for the first time in a long time, he felt he was in the right place, doing the right thing. When he said goodbye at dusk, the girls accompanied him to the corner. Helena was holding the teddy bear. Julia kept her hand on her sister's shoulder. "Mr. Roberto," Helena called when he was already walking away. He turned. "Yes?" "Thank you for coming back. A lot of people promise and don't come back." Roberto felt a lump in his throat. "I will always come back, Helena, always." And this time he knew it wasn't an empty promise. It was a commitment. While returning to the hotel where he was staying, Roberto called his lawyer in São Paulo. He needed to understand the legal processes, the possible paths, the challenges. The conversation was long and revealed that the path would not be simple. But Roberto Almeida had not built an empire by giving up in the face of obstacles. That night, while reviewing documents and making notes, he realized that his life had completely changed in less than 48 hours. The businessman who entered that city focused only on business was about to leave as the father of 2 girls he didn't even know he was looking for. And for the first time in 20 years, Roberto Almeida did not feel alone. For 3 days, Roberto remained in Valle da Esperança, visiting Helena and Julia every morning and afternoon. He didn't force conversations about changes or the future. He was simply present. He helped tidy the house, bought groceries, took the girls to get ice cream in the square, listened to stories and shared some of his own. Gradually, the barriers began to dissolve. Helena started to laugh more openly. Julia relaxed her defensive posture and even asked some questions about Roberto's life in São Paulo. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, while they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, Julia finally broke the silence that had hung in the air since Roberto had made his proposal. "We talked," she said, her voice firm but careful. "Helena and I, all night actually." Roberto felt his heart accelerate, but he kept his expression neutral. "And what did you decide?" Helena squeezed the teddy bear tightly. Julia continued, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "We never had much. Since Grandma passed away, we learned not to expect much, because when you expect, it hurts more when it doesn't happen." Roberto nodded without interrupting. "But you came back," Julia continued, and for the first time her voice trembled. "You promised and you came back, and you stayed, and you didn't ask for anything in return. So we thought that maybe, just maybe, you are different." Helena approached Roberto holding her drawing notebook. "I want to go," she said, her voice low but determined. "I want to see the house you talked about. I want to have the chance to really draw, to really study. And I want Julia to have that too." "And you, Julia?" Roberto asked, knowing that decision had to come from both of them. Julia took a deep breath. "I'm afraid to trust and get hurt again, but I'm also afraid to stay here and watch Helena lose the chance to be happy. So yes, we want to go with you. But there is one condition." Roberto straightened up. "What is it?" Julia looked directly into his eyes. "If one day you get tired, if you realize you don't want us anymore, you have to tell us. You can't just disappear. We've already been through that. I don't want to go through it again." The pain in those words was so deep that Roberto had to control his emotion. "I promise," he said with all the seriousness he could muster. "I will not disappear. No matter what happens, you can count on me." The girls looked at each other and then, for the first time, they smiled at the same time. A small, cautious but genuine smile. "So it's decided?" Roberto asked. "It is," replied Helena. Roberto hugged them both and felt something click into place inside him. something that had been broken for so long that he no longer even remembered what it felt like to feel whole. The following days were a rush of bureaucratic procedures, conversations with social workers, lawyers, and local authorities. Roberto discovered that the girl's mother, Veronica, had given a temporary guardianship authorization to a distant neighbor who rarely appeared. Locating Veronica would be necessary to formalize the situation legally, but for now, with the proper authorizations and emergency documents, Roberto managed to get temporary permission to take the girls to São Paulo while the processes continued. On the day of departure, Helena and Julia gathered their few belongings in 2 old backpacks. Clothes, some books, the drawing notebook, the worn-out teddy bear. It was all they possessed in the world, and it fit into 2 small bags. Roberto looked at that and felt a mixture of sadness and determination. Those girls deserved much more, and he would make sure they had it. The car trip to São Paulo took about 5 hours. During the journey, the girls remained silent most of the time, looking out the window with expressions that mixed curiosity and apprehension. Roberto respected their silence. He knew they were processing a massive change, leaving behind everything they knew, even if that everything was so little. When they entered São Paulo, the contrast was brutal. The wide streets, the immense buildings, the chaotic traffic, the lights, the noise. Julia held Helena's hand tightly. Helena pressed the teddy bear against her chest. "It's so big," whispered Helena. "It is," agreed Roberto, "but you'll get used to it and I'll be here to help." Roberto's house was in an upscale neighborhood in the South Zone. It was a spacious, modern residence with 3 floors, a garden, and a privileged view. When the gate opened and the girls saw the property for the first time, they were paralyzed. "Is this where you live?" asked Julia, her voice full of disbelief. "It is," replied Roberto, "and now it's where you live too." They got out of the car slowly, observing everything with wide eyes. The house was larger than any place they had ever seen, larger even than Helena's drawings. Upon entering, they were greeted by Donna Celia, the housekeeper who had worked for Roberto for years. A 60-year-old lady with a gentle smile and maternal ways, she greeted the girls delicately. "Welcome, girls, your home is ready." The girls barely responded, still processing the environment. Roberto took them to the 2nd floor, where he had prepared 2 neighboring rooms, connected by an internal door. Each room had a large bed, a study desk, a bookshelf, a spacious closet, and huge windows overlooking the garden. "You can choose which one you want," said Roberto, "or if you prefer to stay in the same room, we can put the beds together." Helena and Julia entered one of the rooms and simply stood there still as if they didn't know what to do. Julia touched the bed carefully, as if she were afraid of breaking it. Helena looked out the window and saw the garden below, with colorful flowers and a water fountain. "Is it real?" asked Helena, her voice almost inaudible. "That is," replied Roberto. "All of this is real and it's yours." Helena began to cry. It wasn't a cry of sadness, but of emotional overload. Julia hugged her, and Roberto realized he needed to give them space. "Rest for a bit. When you're ready, we'll have dinner together. No rush." He left the room and leaned against the hallway wall, taking a deep breath. That was only the beginning, the easy part. The true journey would be teaching those girls to believe they deserved all of that. And that would take much more than just a beautiful house. In the first few days, the adaptation was harder than Roberto had imagined. Helena and Julia didn't know how to behave in that environment. They ate little, afraid of wasting. They avoided using new things. They slept together in the same bed, even though each had their own room. They woke up early and stayed quiet as if they were afraid of disturbing. Roberto realized he needed help. He understood business, strategies, results. But he didn't understand trauma, emotional reconstruction, or teaching 2 children to trust again. It was then that he sought out Marina. Marina Tavares was a child psychologist and educator, specialized in children who had gone through situations of abandonment and vulnerability. Roberto had met her years ago at a charity event and had always admired her work. When he called explaining the situation, Marina accepted to help without hesitation. She arrived at the house on a Thursday afternoon, bringing with her a light and welcoming energy. She was a 35-year-old woman with curly hair tied in a ponytail, attentive eyes, and a smile that conveyed security without appearing invasive. Roberto introduced Marina to the girls with care. They were in the living room, Helena drawing, Julia reading. When they saw the new visitor, they stiffened. "Girls, this is Marina. She is a friend of mine and is going to help us in this adaptation phase. Not as a teacher, but as someone you can talk to if you want." Marina sat on the floor in a relaxed position that immediately broke the formality. "Hi, Helena. Hi, Julia. Roberto told me a bit about you, but I wanted to hear from yourselves. Do you like it here?" Julia looked at Roberto, then at Marina. "It's different." "I imagine," said Marina without forcing. "Changing houses is already hard. Changing an entire life must be even harder. You are being very brave." Helena lowered her notebook. "Do you live here too?" "No," replied Marina. "I have my own house, but I'll come here a few times a week for us to talk if you want, and if you don't want to, that's fine too. There's no obligation at all." The way Marina spoke, without pressure, without judgment, began to dissolve the tension. Helena went back to drawing, but now with Marina sitting beside her, observing without interfering. Julia continued reading, but every now and then she cast curious glances toward the psychologist. As the days passed, Marina became a constant and fundamental presence. She taught Roberto to notice signs he didn't know how to interpret. When the girls avoided eating too much, it wasn't a lack of appetite, but a fear that the food would run out. When they avoided using new things, it wasn't ingratitude, but guilt for having more than they deserved. When they slept together, it wasn't just habit, but the need to protect each other, even in a safe environment. Marina worked with them through simple activities, paintings, games, light conversations. Gradually, Helena began to talk about her grandmother, about the good times she had before she passed away. Julia began to share her fears, her doubts, her hopes. And Marina listened to everything with a patience and understanding that Roberto deeply admired. One night, after the girls had gone to sleep, Roberto and Marina talked in the living room. "They are progressing," said Marina, "but it will take time. Abandonment leaves deep marks. They need to relearn to trust, to feel deserving, to believe that you won't leave." "I won't," said Roberto firmly. Marina smiled. "I know, and they will know too. But that isn't built with words, Roberto. It's built with constant presence, with daily choices, with patience." Roberto nodded. "I'm learning." "You're doing well," said Marina. "Better than many would. Just don't forget to take care of yourself too, because if you break, they will feel guilty." And so day after day the new family was shaped. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of tension, of misunderstanding, of steps backward, but there were also moments of progress. Helena began to use the drawing materials Roberto had bought. Julia began to explore the library, and gradually the house that was once just a symbol of material success began to transform into something Roberto never imagined having: a real home. 3 months passed since Helena and Julia arrived in São Paulo. The routine had established itself with a delicacy that surprised even Marina. The girls woke up early, had breakfast with Roberto, went to the private school where they had been enrolled, returned in the afternoon, and dedicated themselves to the activities they liked most. Helena spent hours in the improvised studio Roberto had set up for her on the 3rd floor, with canvases, paints, brushes, and perfect natural light. Julia dove into the books in the library, devouring stories with a voracity that was impressive. Roberto had completely reorganized his schedule. He delegated more responsibilities to his team, reduced travel, and started working from home whenever possible. His mornings began with the girls. His afternoons were interspersed between meetings and helping them with homework. His nights were dedicated to dinners together, conversations about the day, and those small moments of connection that built, brick by brick, the foundation of a true family. Marina continued to visit 3 times a week, and her presence had become indispensable. She wasn't just a therapist, but a bridge between Roberto and the girls' emotional needs. She taught, mediated, and welcomed. And gradually, Roberto realized he no longer felt just gratitude for her work. There was something more, an admiration that went beyond the professional, a connection he hadn't sought, but that was there, growing silently. On a Friday afternoon, while the girls were in the art class Roberto had hired for Helena, He and Marina were talking on the porch. "They are transforming," said Marina, observing the garden. "Helena is more expressive. Julia is starting to lower her guard. It's significant progress." Roberto smiled. "It's thanks to you." Marina shook her head. "It's thanks to you, Roberto. I only facilitate. You are the one who builds every day. Your presence, your patience, that is what matters." There was a comfortable silence between them. Roberto looked at Marina, at the way the wind moved her hair, at the gentle smile she always carried. "You have become essential to us," he said, his voice lower. "Not just for the girls, for me too." Marina met his gaze, and for a moment something passed between them, a silent understanding, a possibility that neither of them had planned, but that was there, undeniable. "Roberto, Marina began, but was interrupted by the arrival of Donna Celia, announcing that dinner was almost ready. The moment dissolved, but both knew something had changed. However, not everything was peaceful. The girls' adaptation to the private school had brought unexpected challenges. Most of the classmates, children of traditional São Paulo families, looked at Helena and Julia with a curiosity that sometimes bordered on judgment. Invasive questions arose frequently. "Why did you come to live with him? He's rich, right? Don't you have a mother?" Julia had learned to respond with evasions or simply ignore them. Helena, more sensitive, sometimes returned home with red eyes, though she denied she had been crying. Roberto noticed the change. He talked to the school administration, asking for more attention to the students' behavior. But he knew he couldn't protect the girls from every look, every comment. The world was cruel to those who didn't fit established standards. The situation worsened when, at a parent-teacher meeting at the school, one of the mothers approached Roberto with a fake smile and poorly disguised curiosity. "So, Roberto, I heard you adopted 2 girls. What a beautiful story," she said, her tone loaded with condescension. "It must be an enormous challenge, isn't it? Children coming from such different backgrounds." Roberto controlled his irritation. "They are my daughters, and they are adapting very well, thank you." The woman was not satisfied. "But don't you think it's risky? I mean, you don't know their full history, what they lived through, what kind of baggage they might bring." Roberto stared at her firmly. "Every child brings baggage, ma'am. The difference is that some are taught to use that baggage to grow and others to judge, if you'll excuse me." He walked away before his anger fully showed, but the encounter left him disturbed. Not for himself, but for the girls. Did they hear these comments too? Did they feel judged, diminished, questioned about their belonging? That night, during dinner, Roberto noticed that Julia was especially quiet. Helena barely touched her food. "Did something happen at school?" he asked, keeping his tone light. Julia shrugged. "Nothing much." Helena looked at her plate. "It's just that," she hesitated, "there are some girls who keep asking if you are our real father." Roberto felt his chest tighten. "And what do you answer?" Julia looked up, defiant. "I say yes, that you are our father, but they keep laughing, saying we don't look like you, that we don't match." Roberto stood up, walked over to where they were sitting and knelt beside the table, getting at their eye level. "Listen well," he said, his voice firm but loaded with emotion. "You are my daughters, not because we have the same blood, but because we chose to be together. Family isn't about looking the same. It's about being present. It's about caring. It's about choosing to stay even when it gets hard, and I choose you every single day, do you understand?" Helena nodded, her eyes watery. Julia bit her lip, fighting back tears. "And if anyone asks again," Roberto continued, "you can tell them exactly that. That family is a choice and that we chose each other." That night, for the first time, Helena and Julia called Roberto father. It wasn't planned, it wasn't forced. It simply happened during a conversation before bed when Helena asked him to check if the window was tightly closed. "Father, can you check if the window is locked?" Roberto froze. He looked at Helena, who seemed not to have realized the weight of the word she had used. He looked at Julia, who was watching the scene attentively. "Of course, daughter," he replied, his voice choked. "I'll check." When he left the room, he leaned against the hallway wall and let the tears fall. Marina, who was finishing organizing some materials in the living room, came up upon hearing the muffled sound. "Roberto," she called, concerned. He wiped his face quickly but couldn't hide the emotion. "She called me father," he said, his voice broken. "Helena, she called me father." Marina smiled, her own eyes shining. "Because that's what you are." Roberto looked at her, and in that moment he saw not only the dedicated professional, but the woman who had become essential in his life. "Marina, he began, but didn't know how to finish. Marina took a step forward, touching his arm gently. "I know," she said softly. "I feel it too." It was a silent recognition, an understanding that something was growing between them, but that it needed time, delicacy. The girls came first. Everything else could wait. The following weeks brought more challenges. Roberto had to deal with complex bureaucratic processes, preliminary hearings with social workers, and detailed reports about the girls' routine. Every visit, every evaluation was a reminder that, legally, that family was still under construction. Marina supported him at every stage, helping prepare the girls for the interviews, ensuring they understood that it wasn't a judgment, but just part of the process. During one of the visits from the social worker, a serious woman named Dr. Patricia, the girls were questioned about how they felt in the new house. "Are you happy here?" asked Dr. Patricia, observing closely. Helena nodded vigorously. "Very, Father." She hesitated, realizing the weight of the word before the authority, but continued firmly, "Roberto takes very good care of us," Julia added with her characteristic honesty. "In the beginning it was hard. We were afraid it wasn't real, but he stayed every day, and Marina helps a lot too. We feel safe now." Dr. Patricia made careful notes, and Roberto felt his anxiety grow. But at the end of the visit, she said goodbye with a discreet nod of approval. The process was moving well. That night, after the girls had gone to sleep, Roberto and Marina talked in the living room, as had become custom. "It's working," said Roberto, more to himself than to her. "They are truly becoming my daughters." Marina smiled. "Because you truly became their father. It's not about legal papers, Roberto, it's about what you built every day." He looked at her, at the way the lamp's light illuminated her face, at the care she had always shown. "Marina, I need to tell you something." She met his gaze. "Tell me." "I don't know how this happened," he began, choosing his words carefully, "but you have become very important to me, not just for the help with the girls, but for who you are, for what you represent. He took a deep breath. "I think I'm falling in love with you." Marina was silent for a moment, her eyes shining with emotion. "Roberto, I feel the same, but we need to go slow. The girls need stability. They need to know you are here for them, not for me." "I am here for them," Roberto guaranteed. "I always will be. But that doesn't mean there can't be room for you too, for us." Marina smiled, touching his hand gently. "Then let's build this together, calmly, with respect for the good of everyone." And so, while the new family consolidated, a new chapter began to be written. A chapter where affection, commitment, and daily choices built something stronger than blood, something called true love. But peace would still be tested, because the past, no matter how distant it seemed, is never truly buried. And the approaching storm would bring with it revelations that would test everything they had built until then. The call arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, 6 months after Helena and Julia had arrived in São Paulo. Roberto was at home, working in his office, when his lawyer, Dr. Henrique, called with news he knew would come eventually, but for which he would never be completely prepared. "We located Veronica Santos," said Dr. Henrique, his tone professional but cautious. "She is in São Paulo, and she wants to see her daughters." Roberto felt the world stop for an instant. He had imagined this moment countless times, mentally planned how he would react, what he would say. But now that it was actually happening, all words seemed to flee. "Does she have the legal right to see them?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Yes," confirmed Dr. Henrique. "She is still the biological mother. There has been no termination of parental rights. Technically, you have temporary guardianship while the process is run. She can request visits." Roberto closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. "And what does she want exactly?" There was a pause. "She wants the girls back." The words fell like stones. Roberto felt panic rise but forced himself to stay calm. "Let's do this. Schedule a meeting, just me and her first, before involving the girls." Dr. Henrique agreed, and 2 days later, Roberto was sitting in a discreet cafe in downtown São Paulo, waiting for the woman who had given birth to Helena and Julia but had left them behind. Veronica arrived punctually. She was around 30 years old, with dark hair tied in a low ponytail, simple but clean clothes, and an expression that mixed nervousness and determination. It was possible to see traces of Helena and Julia in her, especially in the eyes and the shape of her face. "Mr. Almeida," she said, sitting across from him. Roberto nodded. "Veronica." There was a tense silence. Roberto observed her, trying not to judge, but it was difficult. That woman had left 2 children alone, vulnerable, struggling to survive. And now she was back. Wanting what exactly? "I know what you must be thinking," Veronica began, her voice low but firm. "What kind of mother abandons her own daughters?" Roberto didn't answer. He let her continue. "I didn't have a choice," she said, and there was genuine pain in her voice. "After my mother passed away, I was left with nothing. No money, no work, no perspective. I tried to stay in Val da Esperança, but I couldn't support the girls. So I accepted a job in São Paulo in a family's house. I sent money when I could. I asked the neighbor to watch them. I thought it would be temporary." "And why didn't you come back?" Roberto asked, his voice harder than he intended. "Why did you leave your daughters alone for years?" Veronica lowered her gaze. "Because I was ashamed. Because the more time passed, the harder it became to go back. Because I thought maybe they were better off without me. And then I heard that a wealthy man took them to São Paulo, and I thought maybe it was the best for them." "Then why are you here now?" Roberto questioned. Veronica looked up and Roberto saw tears forming. "Because they are my daughters. Because I never stopped thinking about them. Because I managed to stabilize myself now, got a better job, rented a small but decent apartment, and because as much as I was wrong, they are still my flesh and blood." Roberto leaned forward. "Blood doesn't make a family, Veronica. Presence does, care does, choosing to stay every day does." "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "I know you took care of them in a way I couldn't, and I am grateful for that. But they are still my daughters, and I want a chance to do things right this time." Roberto felt anger and fear fighting inside him. "You can't just show up and take everything we built. They are happy, they are safe, they are growing." "I don't want to take anything from you," said Veronica, and she seemed sincere. "But I also can't just disappear again. I want to see them. I want them to know I didn't forget them, and I want, if possible, to be part of their lives again." The conversation lasted for over an hour. Roberto tried to understand her perspective, but every word Veronica said was a threat to the world he had built with Helena and Julia. In the end, there was no clear resolution, only the certainty that the girls would have to be involved, and that what happened next would depend on their choices. Roberto returned home emotionally exhausted. Marina was there, waiting. He told her everything. She listened in silence, her expression concerned but understanding. "You're going to have to tell them," Marina said. "And you're going to have to let them decide how they want to handle it." "They are children," Roberto protested. "They can't carry this weight." "They've already carried much greater weights," Marina reminded him, "and they are stronger than you imagine. But you need to be by their side, regardless of what they choose." Roberto knew she was right, but the prospect of losing Helena and Julia was too terrifying to process. That night, after dinner, Roberto called the girls for a conversation in the living room. Marina stayed present, offering silent support. "Girls," he began, taking a deep breath, "I need to tell you something important." Helena and Julia looked at each other, the silent communication they shared alerting them that something serious was coming. "It's about your mother, Veronica." Julia stiffened immediately. Helena squeezed the teddy bear against her chest. "What about her?" Julia asked, her voice defensive. "She is in São Paulo and she wants to see you." The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with complex emotions. Helena began to cry silently. Julia remained motionless, processing. "Does she want to take us away?" Julia asked, and there was real panic in her voice. "No," Roberto said quickly. "Not necessarily. She wants to see you, to talk, and then, well, then you decide how you want things to be." "We don't want to go," said Helena, her voice broken. "We want to stay here with you, with Marina." Roberto felt his heart tighten. "I know, and I want you to stay too, more than anything. But Veronica is your mother, and she has the right to be in your lives if you want." "And if we don't want to?" Julia asked defiantly. "Then we will fight for you to stay here," said Roberto. "But I need you to understand that this isn't simple. Legally, she still has rights, and emotionally, well, she is your mother. Maybe there is room for her to be part of your lives in some way." Julia shook her head vigorously. "She left us. She chose not to stay. Why should we give her another chance?" "Because sometimes people make mistakes," said Marina, intervening gently. "And sometimes they deserve a second chance, not to erase what they did, but to try to do better." Helena looked at Marina, then at Roberto. "Do we have to see her?" "You don't have to," Roberto replied. "But maybe it's important so that you can make your own choices, understanding everything, so that in the future you don't have doubts." The girls talked to each other in whispers. Roberto and Marina waited, respecting their process. Finally, Julia spoke. "We'll see her, but with you there, and Marina too." Roberto nodded. "Of course, I won't leave you alone in this." The meeting was set for the following Saturday, in a neutral public park. When the day arrived, the tension in the house was palpable. Helena could barely eat at breakfast. Julia was irritable, responding in monosyllables. In the park, Veronica was already waiting, sitting on a bench near the lake. When she saw the girls approaching with Roberto and Marina, she stood up quickly, her hands trembling. "Helena, Julia," she said, her voice choked. The girls stopped a few meters away. Helena partially hid behind Roberto. Julia kept her expression neutral, but her eyes revealed the internal storm. "Hi," said Veronica insecurely. You are so big, so beautiful." "Silence." Roberto placed his hand on Julia's shoulder, offering support. "I know you must be confused," Veronica continued, "and I understand if you are angry. I deserve it." "Why did you go away?" Helena asked suddenly, her voice small but clear. Veronica knelt down, getting at their level. "Because I thought I wasn't good enough for you. Because I had no way to give you what you deserved, and because I was too cowardly to stay and fight." "You left us alone," said Julia, her voice trembling. "We were 8 years old. We didn't know how to take care of ourselves." "I know," said Veronica, the tears falling freely. "And I'm so sorry, more than you can imagine. I thought about you every day. I sent the money I could. But I know that isn't enough. I should have stayed." "Then why did you come back now?" Julia questioned. Veronica looked at her daughters with painful intensity. "Because I managed to get organized. Because I want to be part of your lives. Not to take you away from him," she pointed to Roberto, "but to be your mother again. The way I should have been from the beginning." Helena began to cry. Julia remained firm, but her eyes were red. "I'm not asking you to forgive me now," said Veronica, "nor to come back to me. I'm just asking for a chance. To know who you have become, to be present, even if from afar." The conversation continued, tense but necessary. Veronica told her story, her struggles, her regrets. The girls listened, processed, questioned. Roberto and Marina remained there, present but without interfering. In the end, there was no clear resolution. Only the beginning of a long and painful process of rebuilding trust. Or perhaps of accepting that some things cannot be completely rebuilt, only accepted as part of the past. When they returned home, Helena and Julia were emotionally exhausted. Roberto put them to bed, staying by their side until they fell asleep. Afterward, he sat in the living room with Marina, his head in his hands. "I'm afraid of losing them," he confessed. Marina touched his face gently. "You won't lose them. What you built is real, but Veronica is also part of their story, and they need to decide what space each one occupies in their lives. And if they choose her, then you continue being their father," Marina said. "Because a father isn't the one who generates life, it's the one who stays." Roberto kissed her, for the first time since they had admitted their feelings. It was a soft kiss loaded with promise and fear, a kiss that said, "We are in this together." And so as the storm continued, the family that had formed faced its greatest test, the test of true belonging, the test that would reveal if chosen love was stronger than blood. And the answer was yet to come. The weeks following the first meeting with Veronica were marked by a silent tension that permeated every corner of the house. Roberto observed Helena and Julia with almost painful attention, trying to decipher every look, every silence, every subtle change in behavior. Veronica had asked to see them again, and after much conversation with Marina and the girls themselves, it was established that the meetings would happen bi-weekly, always with Roberto's presence. At the second meeting, Veronica brought old photos, images of when Helena and Julia were babies, of their grandmother smiling, of moments the girls barely remembered. Helena looked at the photos with fascination, mixed with sadness. Julia kept her expression neutral, but her fingers trembled when she touched the images. "You were so small," Veronica would say, her voice choked. "Your grandmother loved you so much, she always said you were going to be special." "Why isn't she here anymore?" Helena asked, holding a photo where their grandmother held them in her lap. Veronica took a deep breath. "Because sometimes the people we love leave before their time. But she left you, and you carry her inside you." Julia looked at Veronica with her penetrating eyes. "You also left, but you are still alive." The accusation visibly hurt Veronica. "I know, Julia, and I will never be able to erase that, but I am trying to come back, in my own way." Over the course of the meetings, a strange dynamic began to form. Veronica was not the welcoming and present mother she could have been, but she also wasn't the one-dimensional villain that would be easy to reject completely. She was human, flawed, full of regrets and clumsy attempts to reconnect, and that made everything more complicated. Helena, with her naturally more open heart, began to ask questions about the past, about what it was like when they were babies, about their grandmother. Julia, more guarded, observed every interaction with suspicion, but gradually allowed small openings. Roberto followed everything with a heavy heart. He understood that the girls had the right to know their roots, to understand where they came from, but the fear of losing them was constant, pulsating, like a wound that wouldn't heal. Marina became his safe harbor. They had assumed the relationship discreetly, without fanfare, but with a depth Roberto had never experienced before. She helped him process his fears, to understand that true love is not possessive, it is liberating. "You need to trust what you built," she would say, while they talked late at night after the girls had gone to sleep. "You need to trust that your bond is strong enough to survive this." "And if it isn't?" Roberto questioned. "Then you continue being their father," Marina replied. "Because a true father isn't the one who prevents choices. It's the one who supports them regardless of the choices." The turning point came on a Sunday afternoon, 3 months after the first meeting with Veronica. The girls had spent the afternoon with her in the park, and when they returned, they were visibly perturbed. Roberto noticed immediately. "Did something happen?" Julia looked at Helena, who looked back. The silent communication happened, and then Julia spoke. "Veronica asked if we wanted to live with her." Roberto felt the world spin. He controlled his breathing, forcing himself to stay calm. "And what did you answer?" "We said we needed to think," replied Helena, her voice small. Roberto nodded, his hands trembling. "You have every right to think, and to choose what is best for you." That night, Roberto barely slept. He lay in bed looking at the ceiling, imagining the empty house without Helena's laughter, without Julia's sharp observations. The prospect was unbearable. The next morning, Marina arrived early. She found Roberto in the kitchen, with deep dark circles under his eyes and a cup of cold, forgotten coffee on the table. "You need to talk to them," Marina said. Truly, without fear, without pressure, but honestly, Roberto knew she was right. Later he called Helena and Julia to the garden, where they used to have their most important conversations. "Girls," he began, sitting on the bench under the jabuticaba tree, "I know you are facing a very difficult choice, and I want you to know that regardless of what you decide, I will respect it." Julia crossed her arms. "But you don't want us to go?" "No," Roberto admitted, his voice choked. "I don't. Because you have become the most important thing in my life. Because when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is you. Because I never knew what it was to be a father until I met you. So no, I don't want you to go. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't go if that is what you want." "And what if we don't know what we want?" Helena asked, her eyes watery. Roberto opened his arms and Helena came running for a hug. Julia hesitated, but then also approached. "Then we find out together," he said, holding them both tightly. "But I need you to know one thing. You aren't my daughters because you have nowhere else to go. You are my daughters because I choose you every day, and that doesn't change, no matter where you are." Julia sobbed for the first time since Veronica had returned. "But we don't want to go, Father. We want to stay here, with you, with Marina, with Donna Celia, with everything we built." Roberto closed his eyes, the tears falling freely. "Then stay forever." "But Veronica," Helena asked. "She'll be sad." "We can have both," said Julia thoughtfully. "Veronica can be part of our lives as visits, as someone who matters, but our home is here, with Father." Roberto looked at the two girls who had completely transformed his life. "Are you sure?" They nodded together. "Totally." The following week, Roberto, Marina, and the girls met with Veronica to communicate the decision. The meeting happened in a quiet cafe where the conversation could flow without pressure. Veronica listened in silence while Julia, with her characteristic honesty, explained, "We want you to be part of our lives, but we want to live with Father. He was here when we needed him. He didn't go away, and we built a family with him." Veronica visibly fought back tears. "I understand," she said, her voice breaking, "and I respect it. You deserve stability. You deserve someone who stays. But you can visit," Helena offered, "and we can get to know you better, just slowly." Veronica nodded, wiping her eyes. "I accept that. I accept any little piece of you that you are willing to give me, and I promise that this time I won't go away." Roberto observed the scene with complex emotions. There was respect for Veronica, for accepting the girl's decision. There was gratitude for her not turning it into a legal battle. And there was relief, deep and immense, because his family would remain intact. The following months brought a new normalcy. Veronica visited the girls once a month, always under Roberto's attentive but respectful gaze. Gradually, a relationship was formed. It wasn't the traditional mother-daughter relationship. It was something different, more complex, but real. Marina moved into the house 6 months later, bringing her books, her plants, and her comforting presence. The girls received the news with genuine enthusiasm. "Marina is also part of our family now," Helena said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The legal adoption process was finalized a year and a half after Roberto met the girls. Veronica agreed to terminate her parental rights in favor of Roberto, maintaining visitation rights. The final hearing was emotional. The judge, a middle-aged man with a gentle expression, looked at Roberto, the girls, and Marina and smiled. "It's rare to see a case where everyone wins," he said. "You built a family based on choice, respect, and true love. May this serve as an example." When they left the courtroom, Helena and Julia each held one of Roberto's hands. Marina walked beside him, her arm intertwined with his. And for the first time in a long time, Roberto felt completely at peace. That night, there was a small celebration at home. Donna Celia prepared the girls' favorite dinner. Marina brought a special cake, and Roberto gave each of them a gift. It was a double picture frame. On one side, a recent photo of the four of them in the garden smiling. On the other, Helena's original drawing, that dream house she had drawn so long ago when she still lived in Val da Esperanza. "You drew the future, Helena," Roberto said, his voice choked, "and we built it together." Helena hugged the gift, crying with joy. Julia wiped her own eyes, trying to maintain her composure but failing wonderfully. "Thank you, Father," said Julia, "for not giving up on us, for staying, for choosing us every day." Roberto kissed each of their foreheads. "You chose me too, and it was the best choice you ever made." Marina watched the scene with a radiant smile. That family, formed by choice and not by blood, was living proof that true love knows no conventional limits. Years passed. Helena developed her artistic talent, winning a scholarship to a renowned art school. Julia became a voracious reader and began writing her own stories. Roberto learned to balance work and family, realizing that his greatest success was not in business but in the two girls who called him father. Marina and Roberto married in a simple ceremony, with Helena and Julia as bridesmaids. Veronica was present, sitting discreetly in the back rows but with a genuine smile on her face. She had found her own path, her own balance, and although she wasn't the mother who raised them, she was the mother who had accepted her mistakes and learned to love from afar. On the wedding night, while everyone danced in the decorated garden, Roberto looked around. He saw Helena spinning with Marina, laughing freely. He saw Julia chatting animatedly with school friends. He saw Donatella organizing everything in her maternal way. He saw Veronica observing her daughters with silent pride. And he realized that that apparently casual encounter in Valle da Esperanza had not been a coincidence. It had been the exact moment when his life began to make sense. The moment when he discovered that family is not about perfection or about blood. It is about choice, it is about staying. It is about building brick by brick, a home where everyone can belong. When Roberto Almeida, the millionaire businessman who thought he would never be a father, lay down that night beside Marina, with Helena and Julia sleeping in the rooms next door, he finally understood the true meaning of wealth. It wasn't in the numbers in a bank account or in successful business deals. It was in that house full of life, of laughter, of chosen love, rechosen every day. And that indeed was the greatest fortune a man could have. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Roberto, Helena, Julia, and Marina has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of choices, belonging, and true love, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you most in this narrative. Every day we bring intense stories like this one.